Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
My name is Wardah Kamila, my ID number 31.
My name Kuratullah Maulida Putri, ID number 17.
My name Satya Hidayatin, ID number 29.
My name Ria Hidayatul Rabi'ah, my ID number 27. Hai Wardah Ria. Halo.
Where have you been? We ran out of getting to business.
Where are you all from?
We were exalted from the library.
See you later.
Why is that? Someone will also clean up later. But as long as you know that if you keep being like that, it will cause problem for you or for others.
Problem. Dog eats foul trash. Keep stirring up small amounts of trash. You will accumulate a lot.
What are the dangers? According to the article that I read, there are a lot of problems caused.
Understanding trash in general. What is meant by garbage? What is waste material that is discarded as a result of the production process, both industrial and household? Another definition of waste is something that is not wanted by humans after the process or use ends. Understanding waste according to expert. 1. Julie Sumirat. The understanding of waste is solid goods that are produced for human activities that are no longer desired. 2. World Health Organization. The notification of waste is goods organization for human activities that are no longer used, either not used, not liked, or thrown away. 3. Big Indonesian Dictionary. It means that waste is an item that is discarded by its owner because it is no longer in use or no longer could. For example, dirt, beverage can, leaves, paper, and others.
Go with the brothers, boo, you know how we do. Go with the brothers, boo, you know how.
Impact of garbage on society. Number 1. Impact of waste on health. Improper handling of waste will adversely affect the health of the surrounding community. The waste will potentially cause health hazards, such as example, diarrhea, typhus, cholera, fungal disease, worm disease. Number 2. Impact of waste on the environment. Example, besides having a negative impact on human health, improper handling of waste also has a negative impact on the environment. Oftentimes, garbage that has accumulated in the waterways causes the water flow to be not smooth and has the potential to cause flooding. In addition, liquid waste in the vicinity of waterways will cause unpleasant odors. Number 3. The impact of waste on social and economy. Example, poor handling of waste also impacts social and economic conditions. Some of them are increased health costs due to illness, unhealthy environmental conditions due to poor handling of waste. This will ultimately have an impact on the social life of society as a whole.
Waste management. Number 1. Reuse. This is a method of handling waste by reusing it directly, but for the some function or other functions. Number 2. Reduce. This is a method of waste management by reducing all things that can cause waste generation. Number 3. Basically, this is a waste management method by recycling waste into something new and can be used.
Not for me to say you love.
It almost looked like Canada's garbage dispute with the Philippines was nearly over after Canada hired a firm to retrieve it this week and bring it back to Canada by the end of June. But today, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte rejected that plan, saying it's not happening soon enough. He says the 69 containers of trash rotting in the Philippines for more than 5 years will now be sent to Canada no later than next week. The containers were initially sent to the Philippines by a Canadian company falsely labeled as plastics for recycling. So what does the federal government do now? Sean Fraser is Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. He joins us now from Halifax. Hi, Mr. Fraser. Nice to see you.
A pleasure as always. Thanks for having me.
So it was the spokesperson for President Duterte today who told a media briefing in Manila that Canada's June timeline, that's the timeline that your government announced this week, for returning the garbage or bringing it back to this country is not good enough. He said it has to be gone by next week. What is the government going to do?
Look, we are absolutely committed to finding a solution here. We've been in regular contact with our counterparts in the Philippines. Canada has offered to take back and pay for the transportation and disposal of the garbage at issue. This is something that we're committed to finding a solution for and committed to doing it in short order.
What does short order mean? Does that mean that it will be done sooner than the end of June?
The last update that I had understood was we were expecting to see the containers moving as soon as the beginning of June, and to have the containers removed by June 10th. There's been likely ongoing conversations since then, but we are working towards removing this in an expedited way. And quite frankly, over the past few weeks, I've seen the process move faster than I've seen government move on many different files. I've been impressed with the ability to award a contract and go through a procurement process on such an expedited basis.
Well, was the government kind of embarrassed into doing that by President Duterte so publicly admonishing Canada for keeping the garbage there for so long?
No, and in fact, we've been working on this before it came into the news for some time. As you know, it's been the containers were sent over and mislabeled before we took office in 2013. We changed the regulations because we didn't actually have the legal framework in place to demand the repatriation of waste that was sent without the consent of the receiving country. So we've actually changed those in 2016, and we're working on a diplomatic solution to this before it became a public news issue.
That was 3 years ago, to be fair, though. That was 3 years ago. And the Prime Minister first in 2015, after being elected, said that he was going to do something about it in Manila.
That's right. And what had actually happened, there was a domestic court process, I understand, in the Philippines that actually found someone liable to remove it, but they've been unable to secure payment from those folks to make it happen. The Canadian company who's at fault has ceased to operate. They were registered, I believe, in 2004 and haven't really done much since. So there has been others that you could point to that should have been taking responsibility. When we realized those solutions weren't going to present themselves, we stepped up to the plate and said we are committed to making sure this is removed, and we're willing to pay for it. And we do have some details to sort out on the timing, but our commitment remains unshaken to taking these containers out of the Philippines and having them returned to Canada.
I understand what you're saying, and you're characterizing them as details. The president of the Philippines is saying that he's going to send them on a ship next week. And I just want to be clear, is that a possibility? Like, has that been conveyed to your government? Is that realistic? What do you think is actually going to happen?
So the discussions that we've been having with our counterparts on the diplomatic level, both with Global Affairs and Environment and Climate Change Canada, have actually been very positive, and we were working towards a solution that parties seemed happy with. To be honest, it was a little surprising for me to see such a strong statement from the President in light of ongoing conversations. But obviously it's a priority for him, and I know it's a priority for Filipino communities throughout Canada as well. We're not going to give up on this. We are going to find a solution and ensure that these containers are on their way back to Canada for processing ASAP.
What happens when they return? Can you sort of tell us a bit more about what the plan is? We know that you've awarded a contract, but do they go over there, pick it up, bring it back? Where do they bring it back? Where does it end up? Where is it processed?
Certainly. So one of the reasons it takes a few days or a week to deal with this is we actually have to make sure that we know what's in the containers. We have to likely fumigate them. We have to ensure there's not a risk of things like invasive species or risk to human health before the containers are returned. When they get back, there'll likely be a facility for processing on the West Coast. I believe Port Metro Vancouver is going to be entertaining a motion in the coming days as to whether they're interested in taking the containers. So that is built into the, it's the responsibility of the contract contractor who's just been awarded the contract to take care of the disposal as well. So that'll be sorted out by the general contractor that we've just awarded the contract to.
I believe the contract was for $1.14 million. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that the total amount that this is going to cost Canadian taxpayers, or could that number increase?
That is the total cost for the transportation of the containers, the acceptance at port, and disposal of the waste contained therein. I don't expect that the cost will increase from there.
So that's it. That's the most it will cost, you think?
Yes, I believe so.
And when it does get back here, you're saying the timeline. Sorry, just to be clear again, was June 10th. You think is the earliest?
June 10th is when we expect the last container to leave the Philippines. We expect them to start moving sooner than that, potentially at the very beginning of the month, which I know is pressing with the importance of Filipino Heritage Month starting on June 1st. I know communities across Canada really would like to see these containers moved, and we're committed to seeing them get out of a port in the Philippines as quickly as possible.
Is there any way for taxpayers, for the government, to recoup the money that you're about to spend, given that company has gone out of business?
Quite frankly, it's something that's extraordinarily disappointing. This should properly be the responsibility of the company who exported the materials without the consent of the Philippines and mislabeled the contents. Canadians should be very disappointed that a business operator in our country would try to pass this responsibility on. To the extent that we find someone who could potentially, we could recoup the losses from that Canadian taxpayers are going to pay, we would explore those options. However, with my background in litigation before I entered politics, I don't want to throw good money after bad. I want to ensure that there's a remedy at the end of the day before we pursue those options.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Fraser. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, a pleasure as always.
That's Sean Fraser, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching. The Canadian garbage at the center of a dispute with the Philippines will soon be coming home. The cost? More than $1 million. Environment Minister Catherine McKenna announced that the government has awarded a contract to Bolloré Logistics Canada to remove the garbage by the end of June. According to the tender, it will cost at least $1.14 million to do so. So how did Canada land in this predicament in the first place? The fight dates back to 2013 and 2014. 103 containers were shipped from Canada to Manila, Philippines. The contents were supposed to be recyclable plastics, but upon opening them, locals found an estimated 2,500 tons of household trash, including kitchen waste and used diapers.
We are not a garbage dump of any country, and Canada should recognize that.
Prime Minister Stephen Harper faced calls to take back the trash, but his government called it a, quote, private commercial matter. In 2015, Justin Trudeau made one of his first trips as Prime Minister to Manila. He arrived to screaming fans, but also to questions about why Canada hadn't collected what it dumped there.
I believe there are loopholes here that were allowed to be skirted that we need to make sure we close, both for Canada's interests and for good relationships with our neighbours.
In 2016, a Filipino court ordered Canada to take back the trash, and the Liberal government has said since then that it's working on it.
We also discussed the garbage issue, which I know has been a long-standing irritant, and I committed to him, as I'm happy to commit to you all now, that Canada is very much engaged in finding a solution on that.
But frustration in the Philippines has clearly reached a boiling point, with President Rodrigo Duterte threatening war against Canada if it doesn't clean up its mess immediately.
Loaded the containers to a ship and I will advise Canada that your garbage is on the way. Prepare a grand reception. Eat it if you want to.
It will not be eaten. Minister McKenna's office says the garbage will be treated to meet Canadian safety and health requirements and will be disposed of by the end of this summer. Over to the Power panel, of course, with Marg, Amanda, Tim, and Chris. Chris, I'm going to start with you because you were in the Philippines for back when the Prime Minister made that first trip. Yeah,
and he talked about it as being a legal issue. The loophole, you heard him describe it. The Canadian government didn't have the power necessarily to enforce a commercial contract and make them take it back, and the company was bankrupt anyway. Look, a couple of things that I think are worth taking away from this. One is that for Duterte, this is a big win, and somehow he's come out looking like the good guy and Canada the bad guy. This is clearly an issue that should have been dealt dealt with before. I don't understand necessarily the logistics behind all of it, of taking back 60. I think there's 60 some of these containers left. But anyway, it's taken too long. Clearly, it's now 4 years or 3.5 years since he made that promise. He talked about it again in 2017. So now it appears that because of yet another threat, we're going to take it, with Duterte saying we're going to send it by ship and dump it in Canadian territorial waters, that suddenly we now have a contract in place and are ready to take it. So there you have it. It's an international kind of blemish on Canada's reputation. It's really hard to see how you can lecture others about things like the environment when you have your trash sitting across the ocean somewhere.
That's true. I would also point to some hypocrisy on the part of Duterte, who, looks like a good guy in this, and certainly used this to nationalize support around midterm elections, which happened last week, I believe. He isn't exactly the hero of most stories, though, to be fair. Amanda, what do you think?
Well, yeah, and despite the fact that this was
no, I'm not saying that
originally, obviously, a commercial, a private matter, and that's why the Harper government, I think, refused to deal with it at the time that it happened. Now we're many years later, and it becomes a public matter because we have the threat from the Philippines of actually dumping all this garbage in our waters, or the equivalent of all this garbage in our waters. So obviously, the federal government, who had made the promise to clean it up, was forced to really, put the gas on it and make sure that that trash was brought over immediately. And I think some people really look at the price tag of a contract like this and they say, $1 million that go to bringing this trash back. But I think the alternative, the idea that trash of that magnitude could be dumped in our water, obviously is not a palatable alternative. So this was the right thing to do. We have to remove the garbage. We have to take care of our mess.
Could it have been a bit cheaper, though, perhaps, if the government had acted as quickly as it initially promised to do something about it?
It was tendered, so you would imagine that, the best contract was awarded at the best price. But at the end of the day, nobody's going to gamble with the idea that trash like that is going to end up in our water. We have to pay the price for it.
Of course, I'm saying basically, Tim, that they had promised, like Chris mentioned, back in 2015 to do something about it.
But Vashi, you're rummaging through the trash now of the
past.
And it's just not easy. What, the two of you didn't do anything? Like, how can we talk about this seriously? I mean, Duarte's kind of like Oscar the Grouch over there. He's come out of the trash can and he wants somebody to take the trash that's rummaging around away. I mean, this is a silly story. It is embarrassing to Canada. I'm surprised that Duarte didn't encourage the Prime Minister to get into the ring with Manny Pacquiao, the Filipino boxing champion, and change the story into great dynamics. I mean, it's I don't know. How does this happen? What does it mean, Vashi? I don't know. I don't have a clue. I failed you today. This is just awful.
Yeah. Thank you. Mark, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I'm surprised it took so long, and it just seems to have festered and festered. I'd be curious to see what they're going to do in future to prevent this from happening, because, as was mentioned, the company involved no longer exists. And, we see a version of this here in Alberta with liability management on, orphan wells and that kind of thing. And I think it's incumbent on the government to, yes, clean up the mess and deal with it. Should have been done sooner, but also what are they going to do in future to prevent this? Because even though it was a private company, at the end of the day, the government and we as taxpayers end up paying for the cleanup.
Well, it was supposed to be recyclable plastics and those sorts of things, not
Diapers
garbage that was going to rot for 4 years. But I go back to my point. Canada has tried to take a very principled stand on the international stage around environmental issues, and yet has taken 4 years and suddenly was able to let a contract and now announce that it's being this garbage is coming back when threatened again by this strong-arm dictator of Philip. I shouldn't call him a dictator, he's like, but this guy who deserves no sympathy out of all of this. So it's coming back. It will be disposed of properly. And to Mark's point, it is interesting. There is an international convention about sending your garbage to developing countries. I think Canada and other countries are going to have to look very closely at what commercial contractors do to ensure that what they say they are shipping someplace is, in fact, what they are shipping someplace.
Yeah, and the point about liability is interesting, too. And the example around orphan wells is an interesting one. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's certainly, what do you do when the company goes bankrupt, right?
You just shut the lid on it all there, didn't you, Vashi? Well done.
Yeah, we're just gonna close the lid and throw out the trash on this right now. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much to the Power panel. Thanks to Tim Powers, Amanda Alvaro, Marg McQuaig-Boyd, and Chris Hall. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for the explanation. I understood the waste problem in Indonesia. Before, I took the initiative to be able to process waste properly and also will not leave catering. Thank you, Chef Food.
Yes, you're welcome.
Not for me to say you love.
Thanks for watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.